Hello all, and welcome to our first Legacy Live. I'm Adrienne Wells, and I'm the lady behind the logo today. I'm going to be staying behind the logo because we have some great colleagues who will be leading this discussion and participating in this discussion. Without further ado, I'd like to hand it over to Danielle Rano, our moderator today.
Okay, thank you, everybody. So we have our guest of honor, Paul Phillips. He had an amazing career stage managing 16 plus Broadway shows over 20 years. He was the first stage manager to work at the Palace Theater, which we will talk about in a little bit. He's worked with celebrities such as Zazu Pitts, who you recently saw, known for the many silent films that she starred in, Billy Burke, also known as Glenda, the Good Witch, and The Wizard of Oz, Cheetah Rivera, Marilyn Maxwell, Tallulah Bankhead, and Groucho, just to name a few. He currently resides in Naples, Florida. And although he is retired from calling shows, he is still involved with bringing theater to audiences as one of the founding board members and artistic advisory board members of Theater Zone. Paul is assisted by Mark Danny, who is the founding artistic director of Theater Zone, also located in Naples, Florida. And he first met Paul while directing Sweet Charity at the Naples Players. And as Adrienne had mentioned before, I am Danielle and I am your host. I've been a member of the SMA for 8 years. Prior to our extended intermission, I was freelancing around the country with both opera and theater. And I first met Paul through Mark while working at Theater Zone. So I would like to just thank our panelists, our digital monitor, Adrienne, and of course, our virtual audience. So before we get started, Paul, do you have anything that you'd like to add?
Like to add anything?
No.
Would you like to add anything?
No.
No, he's ready for questions.
Okay, so first up, Paul, can you just give us a little background, where you were born and, at what age did you enlist in the war and how long were you away for?
Yeah.
I was born October 1st, 1925. I'm 94 years old.
Or 94 years young.
I feel it sometime. My feet get wider, my nose gets longer, I'm losing my hair, my eyesight is not so hot, and otherwise I'm okay.
You know, when you came back to the States after World War II, you went to Hollywood, correct? I mean,
Yes.
Did you always dream to be an actor? Is that what you always wanted to be?
No, when I was aboard ship, there was an actor who said to me, "You ought to try Hollywood." And I think you might have a potential there. So when I got out of the service, I was aboard ship for 2 years, 9 months, and 22 days. When I got back, I went to Hollywood and tried my career there.
And were you in any films while you were out there?
Well, a lot of walk-on parts, just to make a living.
Mm-hmm.
And, but, it was very difficult then. And I found out stage managers work more often than actors. So I said, that's for me. So I became a stage manager. When I came back to New York, I studied my craft and I started doing a lot of summer theater work.
Can you tell us about your first role in I Gotta Get Out?
Gotta Get Out, how you got that part and I Gotta Get Out?
Yes. Well, when I got out of the service, I went around, I was sort of making the rounds. That's what people did. You went around to producers' offices to find out if there's any work available. And I went up to Actors Equity, and there was a sign posted on the bulletin board. Actors wanted to audition for I Gotta Get Out, a new Broadway comedy at the Court Theater. It was raining. It was a terrible day. I looked around right and left. There's nobody there. So I went down to the Court Theater and I auditioned and I got a part. It was a walk-on. I didn't make much money, but it was a walk-on. But the reviewers said, I gotta get out, better get out. And we closed in 1 week. And that was Broadway debut.
Your Broadway debut. I remember you and I were talking about some of your side jobs that you've done. And now we call them side hustles, or, you know, while we're in this intermission, we call them survival jobs. So I know you were super at the Metropolitan Opera. You worked at the Automat. You were a dog walker. Can you tell us about some of those jobs that you did?
Well, I came to New York City when I was out of the service, and I had to get a little apartment. I got a walk up in an old brownstone. I didn't have any windows, but I had a skylight. And I never knew what the weather would be like because I kept the skylight open. If it was raining, I shut the skylight, that's all. And, but I was working at the Automat. And now you don't know what the Automat is, probably. But you go into this restaurant and you get a lot of change, nickels, dimes, quarters, and you put them in this little slot machine. And I was in the back there putting rolls, dinner rolls, in this machine. So somebody would come in and put a dime there, they would get 2 rolls, and the machine would then turn around and I had to refill them. And that's what I did. And then I got promoted. I got promoted to be a server. Now, I was at the Albini Academy of Dramatic Arts, trying to learn my craft. And I told all the actors, oh, come to the Automat. I'll give you a lot of food. I'm the server there. Anyhow, I was there, and like I would give them meatloaf with a lot of gravy, a lot of mashed potatoes and vegetables. And the supervisor saw me doing that, and they demoted me. I was back to the rolls again. I was getting too much food.
And what about, can you tell us a little bit about your time at the Metropolitan Opera when you were a super?
And then I had to make a living. My rent in my little flat I had was only $6 a week. And I had to walk up 1, 2, 3, 4, like 5 flights to get to my little apartment. And I auditioned down at the Metropolitan Opera House. And I was a walk-on in many operas. If I did Aida, I got $4 because I had to put body paint on. There's a big bucket in the basement with sponges, and you're in your underwear and you sponge down this brown makeup to look like a native. And then, well, I got my $4. I love doing Aida because I got $4. If I was supering a regular opera, I only got $3. So what would you do?
I mean, that's over 75% of your rent right there for the week.
Yeah, 75% of your rent was right there.
I know.
So you mentioned earlier, you know, why you made the transition into stage management is because as stage managers, we get to work more than over actors. So, you know, transitioning into stage management, you went and worked 13 seasons in winter and summer stock. And for those of us who don't really know winter stock because it doesn't really exist as much, it's pretty much summer stock, but inside and with heat. So we heard earlier that you worked with some of the celebrities ranging from Tallulah Bankhead, Marilyn Maxwell, Billy Burke. Can you tell us about working with some of these celebrities? I think a good story to share might be, when you did Ibsen's Ghost with Eva Le Gallienne.
Yeah, the story about Eva Le Gallienne and the air
Oh,
conditioning.
yes. I was doing Ibsen's Ghosts,
Mm-hmm.
the Milwaukee Theater. It was winter stock. Now, winter stock and summer stock, they're the same thing. If you had a barn and it was heated and you had seats and you had lights, you had a theater. Anyhow, I was at the Milwaukee Theater and I was working with Eva Le Gallienne, considered the first lady of the American theater. And there was one scene on opening night. There was one scene where she had to hug her son who was dying of syphilis. Charming subject. Anyhow, he was dying of syphilis and he kept saying, "Mother, give me the son, give me the son." And she was embracing him. And I was so bored hearing it, I just went over and I shut the air conditioning because it was making a hum. Well, the reviews came out the next day and said Miss Le Gallienne was so magnificent and electrifying, you couldn't even hear a mouse. Well, when the show was over and the reviews came out, Le Gallienne, she was always called Miss Le Gallienne, and I was always Mr. Phillips. Miss Le Gallienne came to me and said, "Mr. Phillips, did you do something different other than what's in the script?" Well, I said, "Oh no, Miss Le Gallienne, I follow that script religiously." She said, "Now think again. What did you do?" Because the review said Miss Le Gallienne was so magnificent, you could hear a mouse drop, So I said, "Oh, I went over and I shut the air conditioning." She said, "Mark that in red pencil in your script and make sure you do that every performance." So Miss Le Gallienne got what she wanted.
So how did you have that instinct to turn off the AC? I mean, did you just feel that it was too loud and it
Well,
was
I
the
was cold.
moment? It was cold.
I was cold, so I shut the damn thing off.
So, after those 13 seasons, you then moved on to Broadway, correct? And you did your first show in 1959 with Fiorello.
Yes, well, I did a lot of summer theater and winter theater.
Mm-hmm.
And I worked in Michigan at the University of Michigan there in
Ann Arbor. Yeah.
Ann Arbor. And I did a show, Macbeth, with Charlton Heston.
Mm-hmm.
And I said to Charlton Heston, it's a little difficult for me to understand this kind of theater. I don't like the classics like that. I like everyday theater, with successful like Hunter, Sweeney Todd, things like that. And Chuck Heston, he told me to call him Chuck, said, "I'm going to make you like it." I said, "How?" He said, "I'm going to put you in the show." I said, "Ha, ha, ha." Anyhow, he said, "When I'm downstage and I put my arm out with my goblet, you run down with the wine and pour me wine." Now, is that clear? I said, "If you say so, Mr. Heston." Okay. Came performance time. Well, Shakespearean actors, they're always waving their arms. Well, he was waving his arm and he had the goblet, and I saw that and I ran down those steps, going to pour him wine, and he kept saying, "Not now, not now." And I ran back up on the steps. And then he came down again and he was putting out his arm and he said, "Now." And I ran down and gave him some wine. I only lasted 2 performances.
And were you just stage managing that show when you weren't in it?
Were you stage managing Macbeth when he put you in it?
I was assistant stage manager, so I could be in it.
Mm-hmm. And then, so moving on to your start on Broadway with Fiorello, directed by George Abbott. Can you tell us a little bit, how did you get that job?
I knew this lady named Ruth Mitchell, and she was the PSM, you all know, the production stage manager.
Mm-hmm.
And she knew I was doing a show. I was doing a show downtown at the Cherry Lane Theater, The Boyfriend. And she said, "You know, I could use you as an assistant stage manager." I said, "Oh, wonderful." So I signed a contract to do Fiorello. And my last night, when I was doing
The Boyfriend.
The Boyfriend, the cast gave me a party and they kept singing "Give My Regards to Broadway." Well, I did, because I stayed on Broadway for the rest of my career. And I love doing Fiorello. As a matter of fact, Ruth Mitchell said, "I'm going to make you understudy a part in this show. You'll get paid extra every week, even if you don't go on." I said, "Oh, that's for me. I like that." And so we were open for about 2 weeks. And she told me the person I was understudying, he was a certain religious actor. And she said, "He'll never be out. He'll never be absent." Well, he was. He was absent. I had to go in the afternoon, and Ruth Mitchell had to go over my lines with me. And one of the characters I had to cover was a reporter. Fortunately, I can hold a pad and pencil, and I had my lines written out.
Mm-hmm.
And anyhow, Tom Bosley played Fiorello. And when he got finished with us, he said, "Now get out of my office." And I got so scared, I started to run out, and my sleeve got caught on the doorknob, and I almost pulled the whole set down on Broadway. And then another part I had to do, I had to play the part of a butler, and it was a party scene, and I had to carry a tray on, and all the glasses were glued down so you wouldn't drop them. But I was facing downstage, all the actors were facing upstage, and they were all making faces trying to break me up, but they didn't. Anyhow. And then I had another scene in the opening of Fiorello, and they said, "Now, don't sing, but just mouth the lyrics." They said, "Just mouth it." And I had to mouth, "Tell me what I gotta do. Tell me what I gotta do. Tell me what I gotta do." I had to mouth it, but don't make a sound.
Mm-hmm.
Let the singers sing it. Anyhow, that was my Fiorello
Your Fiorello days.
debut. And I loved it. Oh, and by the way, I was only making like $99 a week. And the producers were Hal Prince was assistant producer. Bobby Griffith was the producer. Now, they were both stage managers before they became producers. And Bobby Griffith saw what I was doing backstage. The man who was assistant stage manager, Ruth Mitchell, had to take the curtain up on a music cue. And he wasn't too familiar with the music. And I would stand next to him and I would say, now, go. And he would take the curtain up. Anyhow, on my first paycheck, I got an extra $100. And for the rest of the show, I got an extra $100. Besides my $99.
So after Fiorello, Mr. Abbott brought you to Take Her, She's Mine. And this was a show that you worked with Art Carney. And, you know, for those of us who don't know Art, he's Oscar-winning actor in film, stage, television, and radio, best known to some of us as Ed Norton in the 1950s sitcom The Honeymooners. What was it like working with Art? Can you share some stories?
Art was wonderful. He called all the actors on stage and he said, my door will always be open, my dressing room door. And he had a big urn brought in and his dresser had to make fresh coffee every night. He said, my door will always be open unless I'm in a Black Irish mood. And that happened only once in the entire run. But when he was in that Black Irish mood, the door was shut. And I knocked on the door. I said, Art, are you okay? He said, yeah. Well, I called Ruth Mitchell, who was doing, at the time she was doing Gypsy. And she had the strippers. Well, I said, Ruthie, have Denise McLaughlin come down. She was the tall stripper in Gypsy. And I said, have her come down, jump in the cab and come down. I want her to meet Art Carney. She doesn't go on until like the second act, you know? Mm-hmm. And so Denise McLaughlin came down. She was wearing a mink coat and just had a G-string on. I knocked on the door and I said, Art, I said, I have a birthday gift for you. He said, yeah, come on in. And he saw Denise McLaughlin and she opened her coat and she said, happy birthday, Mr. Carney. Oh, he said, oh, sit down, come in, sit down. Have some coffee. And what are you doing after the show? And everything. She said, well, I have to run off now. I have to run back and do my number in the show. She said, and he said, well, come down after your show. I'll be waiting here for you. And that was that. And because, let me tell you, he was separated from his wife at that time.
I think that's so great because, you know, as stage managers, we're not only, you know, in charge or, you know, have to be on top of managing everything that's going on the stage, but, you know, knowing what's going on within our company and, you know, with our actors and other performers, because, you know, if they're in a bad mood or not feeling well, then that can just end as a, you know, domino effect with the rest of the company. So that's great. But then I know you brought it out on tour, and you worked with somebody else on that tour. Can you tell us about him?
Tom
Jimmy
was very special. He was a good actor. I liked Tom, but he didn't talk to anybody else in the show but me. Mm-hmm. And there was a time when I was out on tour, there was an actor named Jimmy Hannigan. He was a nice guy, and he did his part. There were about 5 students in the show. They played students. And one day, while we were in San Francisco, I got a phone call from this Jimmy Hennigan, who is a wonderful, he never complained about anything. He said, I have a terrible pain on my side. I said, well, Jimmy, just stay there. I'll call the doctor and find out what to do. I called the doctor, and the doctor said, bring him up to the hospital very carefully. You know, the hills in San Francisco.
Mhm.
Very carefully. So I brought him up there, and his appendix were very serious. So they had to operate on. I said, Jimmy, we got to have your parents' permission. I said, who's your mother? Who's your father? He said, Gwen Verdon and Bob Fosse. I said, oh, come on, Jimmy. Don't kid around with me. He said, no, Gwen Verdon is my mother. Bob Fosse is my father. Well, I went back to the theater. I spoke to the producer, the company manager, and I played his part in the show. And I put my assistant on when I was doing Jimmy's part. So I got paid that extra money,
Mhm.
and Jimmy was in the hospital, and I went to visit him in the hospital. I gave him his paycheck and the money that I made off of Jimmy going on for
How long was that? How long was he in the hospital for, and that you had to go on?
about a week and a half. And that was it. And then when that show closed, I got a phone call, and there's a little voice on there and said, is this Paul Phillips? I said, yes. She said, this is Gwen Verdon. I said, oh, Miss Verdon. I thought somebody was pulling a joke on me. She said, I'm doing a new show and I want you to be my stage manager. I said, well, thank you. I said, thank you, I accept. And when I got back to New York, I met Miss Verdon and we became close friends till the day she died.
And how long was that?
Oh,
66 to 2000, right?
I think it was about 40
Like 40
years.
Yeah.
It
Yeah,
was-
I remember one of the conversations that you and I had earlier. I asked you, Paul, what are some of your hobbies that you used to do during the day? Because you told me that, you didn't want to tire yourself out because you wanted to be ready for the shows at night. And you told me that your hobby was hanging out with Gwen.
Yes, yes. Well, one time, Gwen became my best friend. And I miss her very, very, very much. And one time, Gwen and I were invited to dinner, and this couple served little tiny potatoes. And Gwen said, where did you buy those? And they said, we didn't buy them, we snitched them. Now, snitch means stealing.
Mm-hmm.
And Gwen said, oh, where? They said, out in the potato patch, out in the Hamptons. So one day Gwen called me and said, we're gonna go get snitched potatoes. So we were out in the field gathering the potatoes, and all of a sudden there was a voice that said, get off of my property. And Gwen looked up, and here was a man, the owner, with a shotgun. And he said, get off of my property and don't steal my potatoes. Oh, she and Gwen right away said, oh, well, we'll pay you. We will pay you. And he said, I don't want to be paid. Just get off my property. And we got off. Later on, we went to the market in the Hamptons, and they were selling these little potatoes for like $10 a little tiny strawberry basket.
Mm-hmm.
But we got our potatoes, but we had to pay for them.
Can you tell us what it was like working on Sweet Charity? Some of your favorite stories?
Well, trying to think, Sweet Charity.
Well, you got the spotlight operators.
Oh, one night we were playing the Palace Theater.
Mm-hmm.
One night Gwen is dancing her heart out. There's something better than this. And she's dancing, no spotlight. And she kept looking over at me in the wings, but she kept on dancing and she kept motioning with her face, no spotlight. And I was trying to reach the men up in the follow spot. Now the Palace Theater has like 2 balconies before you get up to the spotlights. Well, they went up there, the stagehands went up there and they found the 2 follow spot men tied up by their feet, and the back of their hands were tied behind their back. They were both robbed and tied up and left there. And so we finished the show and we had police there to take the poor guys out. They had to describe the criminals and all that, you know. But Gwen didn't have her spotlight on that dance number for one performance.
And the guy who called the shooter.
And then another time, she got a phone call. We had a doorman who, well, he was okay. He was a nice man. But he
Wasn't
gave
the smartest cookie.
anybody who would call there, he would give them Gwen's dressing room phone number. So one night somebody called him and they want to speak to Gwen Verdon. He said, oh, sure. And he said, here's our number. And he called and said, Miss Verdon, I'm going to shoot you while you're on stage tonight. Oh, she said, could you tell me when so I could be prepared? And he said, no, it'll be a surprise. Well, Gwen called Bobby. Bobby came down to the theater. The whole New York Police Department came into the palace and they were all combing all the aisles. And when Gwen was playing opposite
John
McMartin, he would be on stage right and Gwen would be on stage left. Now they're supposed to be together on the center stage
Mm-hmm.
because they were lovers in the show. And well, Gwen said, if they're going to shoot me, they're going to have to catch me. And so she was all over the stage.
She was a moving
and they
target.
found out it was a hoax. And that was the end of that. And then another time, Gwen had to be in a parachute.
Ride.
It was
The parachute ride.
a parachute what?
It was the parachute ride
A
from
parachute
Coney Island.
ride, yeah, in the Coney Island. And she was afraid of heights. So she was up there and she kept looking at me in the wings, she was in the parachute seat and it was only about 15 feet high. And, but the safety belt broke and she was terrified. I said, oh my God, I thought right away. I called the spot men, I called the light men, I called the stagehands, everything. I said, I'm gonna bring the parachute down and I'm gonna bring the house curtain down and get a microphone that's hot. So first of all, the curtain came down slowly, but we kept a light on the curtain so the audience wasn't left in the dark.
Mm-hmm.
And I made an announcement. I said, ladies and gentlemen, we have a technical problem and it'll be fixed in a few minutes. And now, meanwhile, backstage, I brought the unit down. Gwen got out of there. I said, get ready for your next scene, Gwen. And she ran, got ready for change her costume. And And then I said, to fly out that unit, the parachute unit, and that was it, you know. And Gwen came to me, she hugged me, said, "Oh my God, I thought you were going to make me get back in the parachute jump again." I said, "No, I wouldn't do that to you." And we went right on to the next scene. Well, a couple of nights later, we're doing another performance. And in one of the boxes, real close to the stage, was a brunette man and a gorgeous blonde. Well, how do I say this? They were having sex. And of course, the chorus kids can spot everything. You know, when they're upstage and they don't have to concentrate too much on the show, they're scouting the audience, you know, see what movie stars are out there seeing the show tonight. Anyhow, one time you would see her head, but you wouldn't see him. Another time you would see the opposite. Well, and they said, we got to tell Gwen about it. I said, no, don't mention it to Gwen. You can't break her concentration. And it was a good thing. But we told her after the show, after the curtain came down, we told her what was happening in that box. So Gwen comes out for a curtain call and she takes her bow, she turns around and takes her bow to the cast. She takes her bow to the conductor and the musicians, and she puts her arm out to where the box is, where that couple are, and gave them a little wave, and the audience screamed with laughter.
Wow, you had such a great time on that show. So after that, I know you went to MAME, correct?
Yes.
So I want to read a little anecdote that is a very famous story from that show, and then I want you to comment on it or tell us what you thought about it afterwards. So this is from the book, But Darling, I'm Your Auntie Mame. So it said, one amusing anecdote recited by cast members recalls a potentially hazardous incident that turned out funny. It seems that during one of the performances, the big crescent moon set struck Anne. The stage manager insisted that she complete a workers' compensation form in case there were any future complications from what appeared to be a minor accident. He brought out his clipboard and went down the list of questions on the insurance form. Name, he said in a professional manner. Ann Miller, the entertainer replied. Occupation, star, Miller said. Indeed, in MAME, Miller's star was as polished as ever as it was in Hollywood. So were you there when that happened?
Yes. It happened at the tour of MAME before we put Ann Miller in the show. They wanted to make sure she was okay to come into Broadway to play Angela Lansbury's part in the show. So at one time we were at the Lux Radio Theater. That's what it was called years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, she came to me during intermission and said, "Paul, I hurt my elbow on the set." And I said, "Oh, I'll give you an accident form, Ann, and just fill it out and bring it back to me." She said, "Okay." Well, she brought it back to me where it said occupation. She put star. I said, "Ann," I called her on the side, "star is not an occupation." And so, yeah, got to change that. Put dancer or actor, whatever. She said, "Oh, okay, I understand." She brought it back to me and she wrote in leading lady. She couldn't get away from that star and leading lady. And she was wonderful in the show. And she did a big tap dance number, which they all expected her to do.
And that got added in for her, right?
That was specially added in for her. Angela didn't do the tap.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And what about
What?
when the stagehands got locked up?
Oh, yes. And one time when we were playing at the Winter Garden Theater with Mame,
Mm-hmm.
the stagehands always grabbed a quick sandwich, from some little joint on the corner there. And they always hung out because they had like an hour to kill. Well, a police car came by and said, "Hey, guys, what are you doing there?" They said, "Oh, we're just hanging around until we're ready to go back to work." They said, "Well, get off the street." They said, "But we work here." The cops said, "You heard what I said, get off the street." And they said, "No, we work here." Well, they called a paddy wagon and they took my whole crew down to the police station.
This was right before a show, right?
Yes, I had to call half hour. People are sitting in the theater waiting to see Mame with Ann Miller. And
And no stagehands.
and so I started the show, and little by little, they released the men. So little by little, I had a full crew. By the end of the show, I had a full crew.
So did you guys just not run with full scenery until they got back?
There was a trolley scene, and there would be one person pushing the trolley, and then another person added, I don't know, finally I had the whole crew.
So then you worked on another pretty legendary piece with Judy Garland. Can you tell us about that? Judy at the Palace.
Yes, that was at the Palace Theater. I came back from, oh no, I was finished with Sweet Charity on Broadway at the Palace Theater. And I got a phone call from Sid Luft, Judy Garland's ex-husband. And he said, "Mr. Phillips, I would like you to stage manage Judy Garland at the Palace." I said, "Oh." I said, "What are we talking about? What dates?" And they said, "Well, next week." I said, "What?" They said, "Yes, next week. We want to open right away." Well, I said, "Could I call you back, Mr. Luft, and I'll let you know?" He said, "Okay, but now make sure you call me." Well, I called Gwen. I said, "Gwen, I got a call from Sid Luft. He wants me to stage manage Judy Garland at the Palace." She said, "Paul, she needs all the help she can get. Please do it for her. Don't believe all that publicity, going out every night, drinking and all that. She didn't do all of that. Believe me." So I called Sid Luft. Gwen said, "Do the show." I called Sid Luft back, said, "Okay, I'll do it." Well, I knew Judy was in town. She was partying. She was having a good time. Never came to rehearsal. Every day I was there. I said, "Where's Judy?" He said, "Oh, she'll be all right. Don't worry about Judy. She'll be okay." I was doing a show with Judy Garland and I didn't see her. Anyhow, she finally came on the opening day. I was at the theater in the afternoon trying to do some technical stuff. And Judy showed up. And I said, "Oh, hello, Miss Garland." And she was wearing a hat and carrying some fake flowers. She was at a cocktail party. Now she was opening that night. And I said, "Judy, what are we going to do about the lighting?" And she said, oh, Paul, you know, when I put my hands up on my face, just bring the spotlight on my face. The rest of the show, keep me in full spotlight. And that's it.
So you had no script, nothing to go off of.
So I used to send my shirts out. And when I got my shirts back from the laundry, there was a cardboard to keep the shirts from wrinkling.
Mm-hmm.
So I took all those cardboards out and I put Judy Garland, Act One, you know, and I put all the light cues that I had on my shirt cardboards. and that was it. I mean, it was crazy. And then I showed Judy, I showed her around. The dressing room was down in the basement, believe it or not,
Mm-hmm.
Palace Theater. And I showed her how she could go to the front of the theater from the basement. There's a winding staircase that went up, and she could see and check that audience if she wanted to. And she said, oh, what a great idea. I'm going to make my entrance from here, and I'll walk down the aisle when they play Over the Rainbow. I said, how wonderful. He said, so when the orchestra would get up on, they play all the tunes, and Judy would stand there with me. And soon as they get into Over the Rainbow, she started to walk down the aisle. Well, the audience, all the people that were sitting on the aisle were grabbing her arm, trying to grab her arm, touch her. They wanted to touch her. And she finally got back onto the stage, and that was the end of the aisle entrance. And we never did that again because people were calling in saying, we're on aisle seats. We don't care how much it costs. We want aisle seats. Well, they didn't get it.
So then after Judy, so then you moved on to, you did, I know, Maggie Flynn, and you worked on The Boyfriend. Then you got a call from Bob Fosse, who was impressed with your work from Sweet Charity, to work on Pippin. Can you tell us a little bit about what it was like working with Bob in rehearsal or in tech?
Can I tell one little more story about Judy, though?
Sure.
On opening night, Judy was in her dressing room, and I was calling half hour, and Judy's putting out some makeup. And there's a lady there sitting, having a drink. And I said, excuse me, ma'am, but you'll have to leave. Miss Garland has to get ready to go on stage. Oh, she said, but I'm a friend of Judy's. I said, well, so am I. But you got to leave. And she put her drink down and said, well. And I held the door open, and she left, and I shut the door and locked it. Judy rushed up to me, hugged me, and said, I couldn't tell her that, Paul. You could. And she is a good friend of mine, but she doesn't understand. She can't, she's got to leave me alone. I have to think.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then that was that.
So then Pippin,
Pippin,
you know,
what did I do?
well, remember the story about Bobby, yes, Bobby, when you were in rehearsals?
Yes, when I did Pippin, which was the next Bob Fosse show I did, Phil Friedman, I mentioned his name, well, anyhow, there's a production stage manager who's a very nice guy. I liked him a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And we were doing a rehearsal, no audience. And Bob Fosse was sitting out in the audience with a microphone, and he kept saying, now, Phil, I said it again, I said his name.
It's all right.
He said, I want you to bring the lights up here and down here and change this. And I want you to change the lighting on here on another scene. And he said, the stage manager said, I don't know what the fuck he's talking about.
This was on headset, right? You guys were on headset?
Well, Bob had to put his headset down And we had to stop for an hour. Bob was laughing. He was so hysterical.
So from Pippin, you then did another show with Bob and Gwen, Chicago. And so for those of us who are fans or who saw the show Fosse Verdon, we know that Bob had his heart attack while you guys were in rehearsal for Chicago. So what did you guys do for all those months when you were out of rehearsal? I mean, did you do other jobs, or what work did you do?
Well, Robert Redford was shooting a movie in town.
Mm-hmm.
And the producers on Chicago had some tie-in with the movie producers. And I'm trying to think now. I got a part. The director, I can't think of his name on that movie, but he came on the bus. I was going to be an extra. And he looked at me and he said, "You." And he said, "Read these lines." I said, "Okay." Read the lines. And it was the movie was 3 Days of the Condor. And I had to pace back and forth in front of a brownstone. Anyhow, I did that. And then Bob had a heart attack.
Yeah, like they kept
Bob
the company together.
Yeah, Bob had a heart attack, and Gwen and Cheetah decided to keep the company together until Bob recovered.
Mm-hmm.
And we had a big party at Gwen's house because she had the penthouse, she had the space. And one of them cooked a turkey and one of them cooked chili. Do you know which one did that?
Cheetah did the turkey.
Cheetah cooked the turkey, Gwen cooked the chili. Now, what was wrong with that picture? Anyhow, we had a lot of fun. And but we also were very concerned about Bob. And one day, Bob was when he was in the hospital. There were two ladies who were claiming to have the right to be there visiting Bob. And Gwen was coming up there to check Bob out. And she heard the ladies, they were arguing with each other as to who had the right to be there. And Gwen rushed in and said, "Out, get out, Mrs. Fosse is here." And those girls went scooting out.
Do you want to
What else?
tell this about how the elevator didn't come up the one day during the run? You saved the actors from getting hurt.
Oh, yes, during Chicago, there was a dance number. What the hell is that
All
dance?
that jazz or tango.
Yeah, the tango. And when they finished the number, they all moved upstage. And I had to give a cue to open the panel. And prior to that, there was an elevator that came up. It was about 40 feet drop, Anyhow, I had to make sure that elevator was there before I opened the panel.
Mm-hmm.
One night, the elevator was not there. And so I didn't give the cue to open the panel. And the girls, they always knew they would take their heel and kick to make sure that panel was either open or closed. If it was closed, get off in the wings, stage right and stage left. Well, I saved them all. And when the show was over that night, they all came over and hugged me because they would have all had broken legs.
How did you guys come up with that system? I mean, did you think of it and tell them, or did they come up with that? They just did it as a security to make sure that the panels, if they were open or closed.
Well, I had a walkie-talkie, and And I always give a warning on the elevator.
Mm-hmm.
They say warning, and they told me the elevator was not working. So I knew ahead of time the elevator was not working.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why I did not open the panel. So when they came, they moved upstage, and they pushed their heels against there, and they knew right away there was a problem, and they made their exit on right and left.
Wow.
And boy, they hugged me when that show was over that night.
So you went from working with one legendary director and choreographer, Bob Fosse, to working with another, Tommy Tune, on The Best Little Whorehouse in Texas. What was it like working with Tommy?
Well, it was so different. I really mean different.
Mm-hmm.
How can I explain that? Now, Tommy Tune was wonderful, very creative. And of course, Bob Fosse was very creative also. But there were two different types. I mean, we were in rehearsal at City Center, down in the basement. We had auditions for the Best Little Whorehouse in Texas. And I put yellow tape from the stage door of City Center down, all the way down to the basement where they had to audition. People had to audition. They just had to follow the yellow tape. I remember one actor came there and I said, only 8 bars, only 8 bars. And this actor got in a huff. He said, I don't sing in shorthand. I said, well, bye-bye. And he left. Never saw him again. And
What about with how you had to come up with the acts because nobody was rehearsing anything? Tommy and them weren't rehearsing, so you said you got to get these scenes done and you put them on your cardboard again? The first rehearsals of Whorehouse.
Oh, yes. It's very funny. It was an original story, Whorehouse, and we had the original madam there.
Mm-hmm.
And her name was Edna Milton. She ran a very respectful house. And I said to her when I met her, she was wearing gold earrings and a lot of gold. And I said, Edna, you got to be careful. You know, in New York, there's this yank it right off your ear. She said, let them try it. And she opened her purse and she had a 45. And she said, that'll never happen. And anyhow, everybody was talking, everybody was having a good time. I was in my office at City Center and I tacked up Act 1, Act 2, Act 3. We were in 3 acts. And I put all the breakdown on the scenes and everything. I called Tommy in, I called Pete Masterson. I said, hey guys, this is what we got to do. And 1 week has gone by already. And they said, oh my God. And we went to work. We did the Best Little Whorehouse in Texas.
So then I know that your final show that you did on Broadway was Open Admissions. How did you decide that this was going to be your last show? Or did you know ahead of time? Or was it when it ended, you just said, I think I'm done for now?
It was very strange. Everything was different. You know, there were no big piano boards.
Piano boards.
You know, this lighting man was in his little office with this little computer. I said, how do you do the show? He said, I just push a button. I said, oh. That's new to me. Attendance wasn't too good.
Mm-hmm.
And we had some previews, and then we opened and we closed.
And did you know that was your last Broadway show? That's what
I
she's
think that
wondering.
was my last Broadway
But did
show.
you know that? Had you made that
I
decision?
did not know it was my last show. But back of my mind, I was ready to throw in the towel.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I already had then 16 Broadway shows behind my belt.
Yeah, 20 years, that's a lot. And
I-
you're 16 shows, 16 plus shows in 20 years. You know, a big debate that we've talked about now amongst stage managers and those who work on musicals is, you know, whether or not being able to read music or follow along on a score is important. And, you know, I know that you did a lot of musicals. Did you have any music background, or, you know, how did you learn the shows, or how did you call them?
Well, I like music.
Mm-hmm.
And the minute I knew I was going to do a certain show, I asked for the music. And I had the conductor or assistant conductor, Jack Lee,
Yeah.
to play for me, play the music for me. I want to hear it. And I got familiar with the music before I even went into rehearsal. And I knew just where the music cue should come in.
You should mention that George Abbott made you memorize. You couldn't even use a script for George Abbott to call a show.
Oh,
They would be interested in that.
I don't remember that.
Paul had said to me that George Abbott made the stage managers memorize the script. They couldn't use a script to call from,
Ah,
right?
yes, that's correct.
Yeah.
Why? I mean, did he have a reason?
Reason.
I had my script on my desk and I watched it carefully. I remember Tom Bosley, when I was doing Fiorello, he would come out when the overture was playing. He'd come out with a cup of coffee and he would put it on my desk. I said, Tom, be careful. Don't spill it on my script. Don't spill. And lo and behold, he spilled it. And fortunately, I had another script. And I took it out and I said, now, Tom, don't ever put your coffee on my desk.
But you had a marble notebook with notes because he wanted you not to use the actual script. You could only use your notes. Remember? You showed that from George Abbott. He wanted, the story that Paul told me was he wanted the stage managers to know the show as well as an actor would. And you shouldn't have to look at a script. You should know it. And so all they had was notes of things. They
On where things came.
showed me it at one time. So yeah, apparently.
So we have a question that just came up in the chat. What was your experience as an ASM, assistant stage manager, before you moved up?
You have any differences of being an ASM as opposed to a PSM?
Oh, I don't know how to answer that question.
Can you talk a little bit about you know, working with the piano boards, because I don't think anybody that's here in this chat has ever had to work with those before.
No.
And you know, sort of the differences between having to call cues then versus, you know, now where we just call, you know, a go and somebody presses a button.
Yeah, how many men were working those and how you had to set up
Oh.
the cues? Yeah.
Yeah, there would be maybe 2 men working the piano boards. And if it was a busy show, like Chicago, you may have to have 3 men. And they were great big, you know, big handles. And you had to move them up and down like that, you know?
Mm-hmm. So how did you call those? You know, when you had to call those cues, because now we just call a number and everything that needs to happen is programmed into that.
Yeah.
So how did they, you know, did you have to tell the men on the handles, like which ones to bring down, or did they know?
Like the page before the cue, I would say, electrics, stand by. And they say, standing by, Pappy, standing by. And I said, okay. And then I would say, electrics. They said, yes, we're here. Warning on Q21. And they said, standing by, and they would be holding him, those big arms, you know. And I would say, Q21, go. And they would go, and I count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, out. And that's the way we did it.
We also, we have a couple of folks that shared their reminiscence about manual boards and piano boards in their experience, which is pretty fun in the chat. But one of the other questions that was sent is, do you have advice for a stage manager going into the business now? We know that it's a different world, but what skills do you think are timeless?
Well,
Organization.
that's hard to answer that question. But I want to tell you, I did an English show. David Merrick called me. Is that?
Yeah.
The rehearsal, yeah.
Called me. Well, his assistant called me and said, David Merrick wants to talk to you. I said, oh, okay. I went down to his office in the Sardi building, and he said, I have a show I'm going to do, and I want you to stage manage it. And I said, oh, when do we go into rehearsal? He said, oh, no, we don't rehearse. They've been playing that show for over 6 months in England. I said, oh. He said, they're flying over on the weekend and we open on Monday. I said, what? He said, we open on Monday. And there is a scene change that they did, and they boasted the fact that they did it in 10 seconds. If you can beat that, I'll give you a surprise.
That's what you told the crew, right?
We did it in 6 seconds. I told the stagehands, I said, do this scene change as fast as you could. I'll take you all out to drinks afterwards. Well, we did it in 6 seconds and the curtain went right back up again. And David Merrick was out in the front watching this, applauding like crazy. He loved it. And he gave me a raise.
What's your favorite show ever to have worked on, Paul? Do you have a favorite show?
What was your favorite?
They were all my favorite shows. They were all, I must explain that. I came from a family, my parents were divorced. I was 5 years old. I really didn't have a home to grow up in. The theater was my home. And the people working in the theater was wonderful to me. They didn't know anything about me, but they were wonderful. And I respected them and they respected me.
We have a big amen for that that home in a theater comment that you just shared. Thank you, Paul.
Everybody's agreeing with you on that.
Mm-hmm.
Typing in, we agree, amen. We love
Yeah.
the family, that it's a family.
What do you think is a skill that you have used most in your career, Paul? What skill have you used most when you work on a show?
What's your biggest asset skill?
What was my favorite show?
No, what skill is your best asset that you bring when you do a show?
to respect the actor. You must respect the actor, and the actor will respect you. And if they do anything wrong, you can go to them, but you must always talk to them privately, not in front of other people. And I've never had a problem with that.
Another question that recently came up is, was anybody in your family or any of your grandchildren inspired to go into the theater after hearing or seeing your successful career?
No, they're all on the police department.
He has nieces and nephews all over. Paul
They're all out in Albuquerque.
He never had kids.
I know everybody throughout all of your stories I've seen in the chat pop up, everybody has been saying he's had such a wonderful life, the things that he's experienced and the people that he's worked with. I mean, it's great. And I know that we all really enjoyed, listening to all of your stories and the people that you've worked with.
Well, let me tell you, I had a good life when I came out of the service.
Mm-hmm.
Prior to that, I was in boarding homes, orphanage. It wasn't very pleasant, but I survived. I always survived by being kind to people and expect them to be kind to me because I was kind to them.
That's great advice. Thank
I
you.
mean, at one time at age 5, I was standing on a box washing everybody's socks who lived in the house. Not fun, but I survived.
And why did you decide to move down to Florida after you retired?
Well, I had marvelous friends. Mr. Julius Fleischman and his wife, Dorette Fleischman, and his wonderful children. And one of his children, Joan Fleischman Tobin, has been wonderful to me. When I told her I was going to retire, she suggested I come down to Naples, Florida. And I've been down here now for
19, 20 years. Yeah.
19, could be 20 years now.
Wow.
And she has been wonderful to me.
Well, that's great. Well, thank you again, Paul. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Adrian, and our virtual audience that's out there. Adrian, do you have any closing remarks?
I thank everybody for participating. Please keep an eye on the website, folks, for our archival recordings, and take a look at the other legacy recordings that are available through our library. We look forward to seeing you all in the future.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Good.
That's it?
Yeah.
How was it?